Shorter crank arms are all the rage right now, but how will reducing my crank length with 10 millimeters affect my riding? Let's find out. You see them everywhere right now in the pro peloton. Most notably, Tadej Pogačar has opted for 165mm cranks, and Jonas Vingegaard has been seen on as short as 150mm cranks. He's now gone back, I think, to 160. However, that's still a big difference to what we saw just a few years back, when most guys went for 172.5 or even 175mm cranks. Because of this hype, we have seen cranks being almost sold out everywhere in 165 and 160mm lengths. But I have managed to get hold of a few sets of shorter cranks, and in this video I will quickly go through what you guys can expect if you also opt for shorter cranks. As you may have seen previously in my videos, we run SRAM drivetrain on our bikes, and until recently the only model that offered a 160mm option on their road cranks were SRAM Red, and I'll tell you, they are not cheap. However, my only option a few weeks ago was to go for the most expensive cranks that SRAM has to offer, and because of the recent hype for shorter cranks, they were not easy to get hold of either. I managed to get the last pair of cranks from a Norwegian supplier, but they cost me upwards of 400 euros. But here they are, still in their original packaging with the protection still on. Super light cranks, I think they're around 300 grams. And as you can see, 160mm long. So as I said, I usually run 170, so that's a whole centimeter shorter than what I used to run. However, when I first wanted to try shorter cranks, I wanted to be a substantial difference, so I really could feel the benefits of shorter cranks. But of course, using more than 400 euros on a set of cranks just to try them out seemed kind of crazy. So luckily for me, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, SRAM launched their new Rival and Force group sets. And with this, they also started offering 160mm cranks in these lineups. So I first intended to buy the Force model, which was 150 euros before VAT. However, while I had it in my cart, it was sold out. Just another testament to how popular shorter cranks have become. But since I was going to use this on my training bike, I really didn't care about weight. I found the Rival cranks in 160mm length. I bought them. They were only 69 euros before VAT. So in the end, after importing to Norway, they ended up just around 100 euros. And as I'll show you now, I have already installed them on my bike. The new Rival AXS cranks paired nicely with my old Force power meter, works just as they should. They are made of forged aluminum instead of carbon, which their more expensive counterpart Force and Red are using in the crank arms. However, as I said, for training, this will be absolutely sufficient. And to be honest, it doesn't look very bad either. But the real question is, of course, how they feel out on the road. And I've been testing them for 2 long rides now, one 5.5-hour easy ride, as well as a 4.5-hour ride with some LT1, so I tested them quite well already. The first impression was quite strange, to be honest. When reducing the crank length with as much as 10mm, the entire diameter of the pedal stroke gets reduced with 20mm, so that's a noticeable difference, and something I probably wouldn't notice if just going down to 167.5 or even 165. I immediately felt that it was easier to use a higher cadence, which also showed on my workout data that I preferred a higher cadence than I did with 170mm cranks, which I don't find to be a bad thing. Another thing that quickly came to mind was how much easier it was being in the aero position on the bike when my knees were a full 2 centimeters lower when I was tucking on the bike. When it comes to power, there has been several studies conducted that says that shorter cranks will not reduce your power output even though your torque may suffer. That's probably mostly down to the preferred higher cadence you have when you switch to shorter cranks. And also I want you guys to check out Dylan Johnson's video on this topic if you haven't already. 160mm cranks are definitely on the short side, especially considering my height at 183 centimeters. However, relative to my height, I find my legs to be a little bit on the short side, and my saddle height with the old 170mm crank arms were just above 74 centimeters. Now, when having switched to 160, I consequently had to put my saddle 1 centimeter up, so it's now just about 75 centimeters. And I feel like just adding the length that you cut on the crank arms to your saddle height makes for a very similar feel in the bottom of the stroke and also of the leg extension if you measure it. Would I recommend everyone going for 160mm cranks? No, I don't think so. Especially longer legged individuals could still thrive on 170 and upwards. It really depends on your pedaling technique, your preferred style of riding, and in the end I think really the best method to determine your ideal crank length is just to try. There's people out there who will tell you your ideal crank length based on your inseam length and your riding position. However, it's mostly down to personal preference. And to all the fanboys considering going for 165 or 160 cranks just because of Tadej Pogacar or Jonas Vingegaard, I can assure that their performance on the bike is explained by a whole another factors than just the crank lengths. So just stay calm and let us guys with shorter legs try out the shorter crank arms before they all get sold out again. It will be really exciting for me to test further how these crank arms fare when I go for higher intensity workouts. That will also help me decide if I'm going to keep the red cranks for my race bike. I'm still open for the fact that these cranks may not suit me and that I may need to return the red cranks. That's why they're still in their original packaging, and I was really lucky that I was able to test it out with those cheaper cranks first. So if you want to test out shorter cranks, I definitely recommend going for the cheapest model first to avoid spending hundreds of euros on cranks you can't return because you already used them. I will try to keep you guys posted on how I fare with these shorter cranks, and if you have any questions or comments, just leave them down in the comment section. I will try to answer them all, and until next time, see you. Ciao.